Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Once again, this is the 11th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment virtual conference. It is presented by Northeastern State University. And today is the start of the second week of our conference, and we have sessions through the end of the day on Friday, Valentine's Day. I'm Bob Ailes. I'm your moderator. We have Michelle, who's doing the closed captioning for all of our sessions. To view the caption, simply click on the closed caption icon on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. Today's session is, I think, going to be an interesting one. It's called Go Live, Synchronous Online Teaching. We have with us Kate Grobergus.
Yeah.
Is that right? Oh.
Yep.
She is a Spanish professor at Madison Area Technical College in Madison, Wisconsin. I think the only Spanish I know is no habla español.
Yeah, that was the first thing I was going to ask, if there were any Spanish speakers in the group today, because once in a while a little Spanish might slip in when I'm in my online classroom here. So
see, that's all I know. Sorry.
I know. It is funny, like you get in this online setting and the Spanish just comes because that's what you're used to. Anyway, great. So it looks like, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, why don't you just take it away? Keep on going.
Thanks. Perfect. So yeah, it's really great to be here with all of you today. I'm so glad you could join us live, right, for synchronous online teaching. And it is something I really love to do now. We'll chat a little bit more about that in a second, some of the stories that we'll share with you today. But welcome to everyone. Pat yourself on the back for being here today. It really is important to take time for these, professional development type activities. And this is a great way to try out, in this case, Synchronous, because this is very much what like my online synchronous classroom looks like. So pat yourself on the back for being here today. And in doing this, like I said, the goal is really to spend about 35, 40 minutes sharing stories with you, okay? Stories from the synchronous online classroom. I promise they all have happy endings. We'll take a look at some of these stories and share with you some of the things we're doing at Madison College. And then we'll have time for some very specific, questions and answers and things at the end too. In doing this, we're going to look at, the challenges as well as the, challenges, limitations, if you will, of the synchronous online classroom, but also the benefits, the many benefits there are to synchronous online teaching. So we'll try to pull those out by way of sharing these stories with you today. So a couple of housekeeping things. One is that we do have a bit.ly link. Go live today. Notice that it is with capital letters, go live today. And if you type that into your browser, of course, you will find a little folder of the materials from today. So the slides, as well as some resources and a particular article about synchronicity. So if you just keep track of that link, I'll show it at the end again too. It'll allow you to access the materials from today. So let's get started. Vamos, right? A little bit of Spanish for you. So our first story is really about how I got into synchronous online teaching and, how I got developing it, right? Like how it was the process that happened. So you can see here that I'm in my online classroom, that we use Blackboard Collaborate for our online synchronous sessions, very similar to the Zoom we're using today, right? But, it's just what we have at our college. Since we use Blackboard, we use Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. But there's also Zoom, we're using today. There's WebEx. Those are probably some of the three most popular. But all of these type of technology work very similarly, and that's so there I am in my online classroom, smiling, of course, because I do enjoy online teaching. I have been doing it now for, oh gosh, I think it's going on 13 years of online work. And so what I would say is that it wasn't always this way. So when I started teaching online, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? A little bit how I felt when I first started teaching online. Kind of like, this is weird. I don't know. I didn't have my synchronous model yet. And I felt a little bit like I spent so much time behind the scenes and really not enough time directly interacting with students. And so what I would say with that is, like I said, give yourself a little time. Obviously, if you're considering synchronous, it takes a little bit of a leap of faith. And even when I moved to my synchronous model, I felt a little bit like, yikes. But I promise that it does have a happy ending. Because in the end, what I discovered is that it just takes some time working with administration to figure out how to set up the course, how to work registration, how to make sure synchronous is possible for students. It takes a little bit of time, you know, working with administration to figure that out at your school. But once it did, we were able to develop a really great synchronous model. So we'll go into some more details with that as we get going. So the second story that I want to share with you is the student perspective, okay? A little bit about the student perspective. So you can see here two of my students who graciously opted to allow me to use their picture today of them in the synchronous classroom. Two really fun students. And what's neat about it is that, you know, when students are in my synchronous online classes, the synchronous portion we'll look at more specifically in a moment is technically the hardest part of the class, if you will. You know, it's where most of the large form or summative assessments happen. And so in a sense, it's kind of like the hardest area to earn points in the course, or the most challenging piece of the course. However, in their course evaluations, absolutely every semester, the majority of students say my favorite part were the synchronous lab sessions. We call them lab. So it's just interesting that it's sort of like, to me, it was the equivalent of a student saying, my favorite part of the class was the final exam. You're like, what? This is the hard part of the course, but it's definitely their favorite part because it brings out the human. And so often students in online classes can feel that disconnect, right? That virtual gap, sort of like they don't really feel connected with other classmates. But in the synchronous online classroom, they absolutely do. They know each other's names. They know everything about each other. They know each other's pets because pets tend to walk into the synchronous sessions in the background. So it really gets to be more of a family setting, and they really feel connected like they would in a face-to-face class, okay? So how does it work? Let's talk a little bit about the logistics of this student experience. So you're getting to kind of experience it right now, right? Like, so you're in this live setting. You would be with your group of classmates. But in the Collaborate room, we also break folks into breakout rooms. So notice how in this picture, there's just two students. That's because we're using what's called virtual breakout rooms, which are available in generally all of these video conferencing tools. But the idea that you can then put them into groups of 2, groups of 3, groups of 4, and then pull them back to a large group. This becomes really important because in the online environment, it's really hard to feel like you can directly interact with a bunch of people at once. And so you need to be able to, you know, connect in those smaller groups where you can see people, hear people, you know, and really interact. And so those breakout things are really at the heart of the model. I want to give you an idea of what it's like when my students are in breakout rooms. So let's hope that you can hear this well enough. We'll try to adjust the volume. This is just two students who are current students of mine, who offered to do a demonstration, or were willing to be videoed to show, in this case, for all of you, what it's like when students are interacting in this type of a setting. So I'm going to give you a chance to listen to it. It is worth noting that the student here on the left with the glasses is actually a student who has documented social anxiety disorder. And she said that it was okay that I shared this with you because often in a synchronous online setting, the first question people will ask is, ooh, what about those students who are nervous about being on camera? So this is a student who has accommodations through college for social anxiety disorder. And you'll notice as you see this, really how impressive it is. And we'll talk about how that was possible in just a moment. So take a look. It's in Spanish, of course.
Es mi favorito. Ella le gusta tomar café de Dunkin' Donuts cuando hace su tarea. Nunca hago mi tarea sin café. Después de tarea, ella siempre va a ver su gato. Mi gato se llama Papi. Ella solo tiene 3 piernas. Ruben almuerza a la 1 de la tarde. Siempre como una manzana con mi almuerzo. ¡Qué delicioso! Muchas gracias para escuchar la rutina de la mañana de Galen.
What's really wonderful for me to watch this is you notice again how that student who does have that social anxiety, how is that possible? And so the way that it becomes possible is that, one, we make sure our students are in small groups in the synchronous environment. So they're divided into cohorts of, anywhere from about 8 to 10 students. So they're never in front of a huge group, right? And those are the only students that that person really needs to get to know. So they actually can get to know one another. So in a sense, if you just put if you have a class of, for example, 35, we divide our class into these cohorts of students. And so within those smaller groups, only the students that are in each smaller group are the ones that actually interact together. Okay, so any given student really only has to get to know somewhere around 8 to 10 other students online throughout the entire semester. And so as far as they're concerned, the class is 8 to 10 students. And that's a number where they can actually get to know those students, right? So they'll know each other's pets, as you saw, the example here. They'll know each other's children. They'll know all about each other, right? Because they've constantly been interacting and in those smaller communities. So when you look at an example like this and you see what can be possible in the online environment with Synchronous, what I would say is, if you have your microphone, go ahead and turn your microphones on for a second. What do you see as the advantages of the Synchronous? In other words, what do you see as an advantage? Possibly you're already teaching online and, or maybe you're considering it, but you're looking at this Synchronous model. Just go ahead and turn your mic on. What do you see as the advantages? You want to share if you see how the students are able to interact and stuff. What do you think?
Well,
okay. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Oh, I was just going to say it just seems it's a lot more interactive, and I think it's more conducive to learning because you've got somebody right then and right there to give you feedback rather than kind of trying to learn it solo and get feedback later on from the instructor.
Yeah, exactly. You get that actual live real-time feedback. You're right.
And I was just going to add that I really love that they have that connection with each other, because I think that when we feel connected, we tend to hold ourselves more accountable to whatever the curriculum is, right?
Yes, that's so true. That connection, that community that brings engagement, keeps students involved. Yeah. Did you want to share anything, Lisa? It's okay if you don't, it's all right. So you get the idea of what some of the benefits are. So let's take a look now.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Oh, I can, yeah.
I'm sorry. I had muted that. I've been teaching online for a long time, and this is something I think that has definitely been missing, kind of like the cherry on top at times with my students, because I teach a music class, and when I teach it in a seated environment, we have that more hands-on. We can discuss, like Beethoven or Mozart more in depth, but with an online setting, this is what we need. This could connect them a lot better with the music in itself.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Lisa. Hopefully this little video gives you just a sense of what it's like when students are interacting. Like in this case, they had been asked to do a quick little project where they had to they had to decide which person was going to be the actor and which one was going to be the narrator, and they had to describe someone's daily routine using the language, using Spanish. We had studied daily routine. And so you saw here how the one student was kind of acting and she was saying things too, but the other student was doing that. So it gives you a sense of the level of interaction. This was like a group project they did live.
Another thing I'd like to say is I notice in classes, whether it's online or seated, there are a lot of students that hold back. They will not answer questions or participate in any way. And I think this kind of forces them a little bit to get more involved in the class. And in the end, I think they're going to like it.
Yeah, it is funny now. Like this video was taken at about two-thirds through the semester, last semester. So keep in mind, these students have been interacting with each other on video for several weeks before this. And we always make sure to start with things, kind of easing them into it. This is, obviously the work of many weeks, right? Of, getting good with the Synchronous. By the end of the semester, it's amazing how much they can do and how comfortable they are with it. So this little curtain here is kind of like the idea of what's behind the curtain here. So if we're talking about Synchronous, You know, it's not just about using synchronous elements. A lot of online classes use synchronous elements, but when we're talking about specifically synchronous online course delivery, it takes a different tone. Literally, the design of the course is, you know, at the heart of it is the synchronous. And so it literally affects your instructional design. So let's take a look at instructional design of Synchronous Online. I'm going to share with you the design we use at my college. Now, not that you would need to do it exactly this way, just to give you an idea of you know, where you might start or where you might go with it. So at our college, at the heart of the course design is a weekly live class. So that means that students are literally required to be online at the same time with their cohort, with their small group, right? 8 to 10 students-ish, each week at a certain time, and with me, okay? So it's me and the cohort small groups. At the most, we've had like 12 students in a cohort small group, ideally around 10. And that is the heart of the course design. So students are online every week at that time. And during that time, it's literally, it's not instructional in the sense like, you know, because it's very easy for me to asynchronously present content. So all content is presented asynchronously, but this is the application of the content, okay? So they've already studied a particular whatever it is for that week. They come into class and this is the application of it. Okay, so it's literally lab. We call it lab for that reason because it's like a science class where you would learn about something and then come to lab and try to put it into practice. And so that's how we do it here. So there's no instruction really that takes place. I shouldn't say no instruction, but you know, that sort of informal guiding, correcting, instructional things, but nothing formal instruction that happens in asynchronous. And then as that becomes the heart of the course, and then around that, there are several other synchronous parts. So we always have an online happy hour, which is just a way that I like to say office hours. We call it happy hour because it sounds more fun, but also there's always some incentive. So just like happy hour, there's always something fun about a happy hour. When you come to online happy hour, there's something you'll get out of it. For example, there might be an opportunity for bonus points or extra credit. There might be some secrets or tips given out about an upcoming assessment or test or whatever. So there's always some sort of incentive, kind of the equivalent of having a candy dish in your office. So when they come to office hour, they get a piece of candy. Is something virtual that will be like that. They'll want to see. Consultation. So in my courses, I also do quick consultations. So at the end of the weekly live classes, I will pull a couple of students always that I think I need to chat with. You know, maybe there's some reason they're at risk or they're, you know, something, or I just want to compliment them on something they've done. So at the end of each weekly class, I pull out a couple of quick consultations. How's it going? I'm checking in, you know, or, oh, I noticed this one thing happened. How can I help you out with that? And so it allows for those little quick interactions, super quick, couple of minutes, right? Study groups. So students, because they're used to this online platform, kind of like this one, I allow them to use it for study groups. It's open 24/7. And students do this. I do provide incentives. So in other words, if they do form a study group and they meet outside of class, they can earn something called pesos. Now, pesos you might recognize as the word for the type of money that they have in certain countries like Mexico. And so my students, if they do things like study groups or extra type things that will help them learn, they earn pesos. With those pesos then, they can cash them in. Okay, so at the end of the semester, they can cash them in for things like, removing a late penalty on an assignment, or adding an extra point to a test, or it's the only form of extra credit really we have in the course. But those pesos are used to encourage them to use synchronous outside of the weekly class. Okay, so like study groups or online happy hour, things like that. Assessments. So assessments are done definitely synchronously. Since synchronous is a big component of the course, there are synchronous assessments that happen during weekly live class. Okay, and so all of these things, you know, work together. Whoops, I didn't even mean to move that. That was kind of exciting. We'll go back here to the live class. And, you know, what I would say with that is that, yeah, it becomes super important that also we do something called partner chats. So what that means is we also have a tool through our textbook It's really great. Where students can connect on video, record what they do on video, and submit it to me through their textbook site. This may also be possible through your LMS, or you could use our Zoom or Collaborate room or WebEx room as well. But they meet without me to do projects and then turn it in, and then I see them on video interacting and I grade it. So all of those are what makes up the synchronous course design. Notice the difference there with where it's not just synchronous elements, right? It's actual synchronous design, meaning that the whole course is designed around that synchronous core. So obviously benefits, you guys named them already, right? But some things that our students are saying, so these are quotes from student evals. I love that I can stay in the comfort of my own home and still get to know my classmates. Yeah, right. Like you guys were saying, you actually make those connections. It's great that I can attend study group even though the class is completely online. Yeah, these are from actual student evals. They love that, because they're already comfortable with the synchronous tool, it's easy enough to do a study group with it, right? And then also the best part of the class is communicating with peers every week during lab. Now this is awesome because like I said, lab, those points are hard to earn because they get scored every week in lab on how well they're able to apply what they studied during the week. It's not just a show up, get the points. And so it's interesting to me that every semester there will be comments about how they just realize how important it is to connect with their peers. So I think we can pretty much agree that there are benefits, right, to doing this, but boom, there are challenges too. Okay. And I love this picture. This is literally from my phone once when I was connecting, it'll say, sin conexión. This just is in Spanish. It's like, without a connection, right? Try again. So technology, yeah. Synchronous online teaching requires more onboarding. Okay. So synchronous online teaching does require more onboarding. Anytime you're using synchronous, in my mind, there will be more onboarding because synchronous is tech heavy, it's, what do you want to say? It takes a little more for people to get comfortable with it. And so it's an investment, definitely in onboarding. And there will be moments, where, yikes, things, don't work or whatever, just like in any other online classroom. And so someone who's considering a synchronous model will, one, have to really buy into the fact that there will be some onboarding. So that means for my synchronous online classes, I start orientation 2 weeks before class starts. I open it. I'm already emailing the students. I'm already allowing them into the classes 2 weeks ahead. I have very detailed onboarding process, right? With, virtual tours, like lots of screencast videos explaining, I shouldn't say lots, but like one main one that's a virtual tour and then several little tiny ones that they can refer to, kind of like how to help videos. And so, yeah, it takes a little bit more of a very intentional onboarding process to make sure that students are up and running, because literally my students will have live lab the first day of class, especially in semesters when we start on a Tuesday. Often my classes start on a Tuesday and they have live lab on Tuesday. So the very first day of class, they need to be ready to come into live lab. So that onboarding has to happen prior. And so I always say with a synchronous online class, onboarding starts with registration. So as soon as my classes are full, I immediately email all the students, kind of right after open registration hits and the classes are mostly full. I start emailing the students, welcome to the course. I tell them 4 things. Welcome to the course. I tell them about who I am. I tell them about what to expect out of the course. And I tell them that 2 weeks before class starts, they will get another email because orientation will start. And so those are the 4 things that we do. And then 2 weeks before class starts, they get their orientation welcome, class is open, they start orientation. Day 1, they're in live class. Now, the first live class is orientation. So we take that first live class to literally go over the online classroom, go through all of the things, all of that, right? So they feel very up and running. So that would be my one challenge with the synchronous, is it takes a bit more of, very conscious, detailed, well-directed onboarding. On that note, now I know that this is not something that you're necessarily reading. It's a lot of text on a slide here, but I want you to be aware that in a synchronous class, I think even more than regular asynchronous online, we have to have a super really easy to understand, ironclad, what I call tech process, okay? So what to do in case of technical difficulties. Synchronous is challenging. And so I like to call this uno, dos, tres, ole. If you know any Spanish, that's 1, 2, 3, ole. And it's just, there's literally like a little dance. Language teachers, we're crazy. We make the students do these little dances and things to help them remember. But basically it's a process, okay? So we tell students up front, you will probably have an issue at some point. This is a synchronous online class. I always say if you were taking face-to-face class, you have to worry about weather, parking, traffic. In this class, you'll have to worry about browser weather online. Okay, so we teach students how to follow 3 steps. You know, switch, refresh your browser, call tech support. Only email me if tech support says there's an, confirmed issue. Because you can't, in a synchronous class, one of the dangers is when I work with a lot of faculty who are moving to synchronous. One of the dangers is you need to avoid becoming tech support, right? We don't want that to happen to you. So we need to avoid becoming tech support. And so this is a process that I affectionately referred to as don't feed stray cats. So even if a student comes to you week 1 and has a tiny little issue with their whatever synchronous platform or something, don't solve it for them, right? Don't solve it for them even if you want to. Give them a very compassionate response. So sorry that happened to you. Immediately empower them to fix it themselves. No problem. I will give you another extra 24 hours to complete this. Just remember to follow the uno, dos, tres, ole steps, copy and paste them into the email. You can do this, boom. But never feed any stray cats so that you get empowering the students to get up and running. In a synchronous class, it's so essential to get the students empowered to problem solve. So by this point in the semester, I think I'm now in week 4, I don't get any questions. Students are well trained on how to make sure that tech is up and running. So those are some of my tips for making sure that the challenge of onboarding happens, right? So the very, very detailed onboarding as well as this tech process. We're ready for story number 3. So we've looked at the story of kind of my experience getting into synchronous. We've looked at the student experience of getting into synchronous. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the third story, which is this idea that synchronous requires a lot of technology. So we want to really focus in on integration. You've probably heard a lot about the difference between tech use and tech integration. And so with a synchronous online model, we definitely have to make sure that any tools that we're using are deeply integrated and not just used, and that they form an integral part of the course. They're well embedded. So I want to give you a couple of resources to help you out with that. Some you may be familiar with, for example, the TPAC framework. This is also linked in your bit.ly file, so you can refer to it. There's a video that will give you some more detail on it. But so as you're envisioning a synchronous class, we want to make sure that any technology we're using, has definitely what I like to call a pedagogical purpose. So TPAC is the idea that pedagogy, the way that we teach our discipline, the content that we're teaching needs to be driving the technology. They all have to work together. So we have to be really careful that in a synchronous class, because synchronous is hard and takes a lot of onboarding for students to use synchronous tools and be comfortable with them, I don't use a lot of other tools. People will always say to me, oh, you teach online, you must use this tool or that tool or this, whatever. And I'm like, nope, I do a lot with what I have. So since I'm committing to synchronous and it has a clear pedagogical purpose, I know exactly why and what I'm going to do with that synchronous, I don't do that much else. Everything else, other tools that I use have to be easily linkable or kind of embeddable into what I'm already doing in Blackboard, for example, because I want to make sure that any technology has a clear pedagogical purpose and that I'm not spending too much time making sure my students are learning all this interesting, all these tools. I always tell my faculty who are starting synchronous, I'm like, don't download the Amazon App Store because there's so many cool tools out there. But when you're doing synchronous, focus on the synchronous. What can I do with the synchronous tool I'm already using? Because students will thank you for it if there's not too many other technologies. So in other words, focus in on your synchronous tool, deeply embed it, make sure it has clear pedagogical purpose. The content is, aligns directly with the content, right? Another framework that will help you as you develop a synchronous online course is something called SAMR. You probably might be familiar with this as well. It's the same idea with tech integration. But it's this idea that, how deeply am I embedding the technology? So For example, if you're going to bother to teach students how to use a synchronous tool like Zoom or WebEx or Collaborate Ultra, make sure that you're not just substituting. So substituting is the lowest level of tech integration. It has a place, you know. For example, when you're teaching an online class, you don't have a paper book, but you know, you might have an ebook, right? So that's a example of substitution. So you have an ebook instead of a paper book. Well, that's important in an online class, you know, but it's not the deepest level of integration. So like, for example, with Synchronous, since it has a higher onboarding requirement, you kind of want to make sure you're reaching those upper levels of tech integration. Okay, so for example, the augmentation, modification, redefinition, see how it goes up. You want to get to the point of redefinition, right? If you're going to bother to use a synchronous tool and to onboard students to use a synchronous tool, you want that technology to literally make it possible for students to do things they wouldn't have been able to do before. Because again, I always say the level of onboarding, you know, should match the level of tech integration. So if the level of onboarding is pretty high requirement to get students up and running, it should be doing a lot for them. Okay, so that redefinition. So for an example, in my class, how are we redefining things? You know, a lot of it is that, you know, that the students are using our room for study group. So now not only are they coming to class, having all those interactions, they can now connect outside of class virtually to, you know, studying things, whatever, outside of that. So that would have been inconceivable if they didn't have that synchronous tool, right? So we're getting to those deeper levels of integration. The Starbucks thing here is just for fun to help us realize the difference. You know, like Starbucks coffee versus coffee at home. Okay, that's a substitution. When you get to pumpkin spice, oh my gosh, you have redefined the concept of coffee. You see, you're doing things that were otherwise or previously inconceivable without the tool that you're using. So if you're using that synchronous tool, make sure you're reaching those higher levels of integration. Again, there's a nice video in the resources that I'll give you in the bit.ly file about SAMR. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about this course breakdown. So in a synchronous course, we just talked about how if we're going to bother to do synchronous, we better be doing some pretty exciting things with it. So in my courses, I'm just going to give you an example. The course is literally 50-50. What does that mean? I'm basing that on the grade. So 50% of the student's grade happens in synchronous. And how does that lay out? So asynchronous is the absolute bulk of the instruction happens asynchronously. The formative assessments, quizzes, all those little leading up tests absolutely happen in the asynchronous. There is class participation in the asynchronous, you know, discussion boards or asynchronous discussions, absolutely, and lots of homework. The synchronous, however, has different type of instruction, that little clarifications, you know, maybe digging a little deeper on something, but all the summative assessments happen there, and the bulk of the class participation happens there. And so that is why 50% of the grade literally comes from the synchronous in my course. And so that may seem like a lot, but here's the caution that I would tell you. Is if you don't make synchronous enough of the grade or the, you know, the reason, the ability to be successful in the course, if you don't do that, students will see it as optional. Now, optional synchronous elements in an online course can be very valuable and great. But when you're talking synchronous online delivery, where the synchronous, you know, is literally they're doing things that they wouldn't be able to do outside of that, it has to be deeply embedded so much that the students realize it's not optional. So whatever percentage of the grade you decide that is, but I would caution you to make sure it's a big enough portion. If you're going to require synchronous, make sure it's a big enough portion, because otherwise students will view it as optional. And that's a problem, right? The way to do that, of course, is to make sure the synchronous has a clear pedagogical purpose. Because if it has a clear pedagogical purpose, students will realize they can't be successful without it. So assuming that you want to require synchronous, it does require us to kind of, oh boy, reimagine online enrollment, because, well, how do I get to require that? I will fully tell you that when I started out, my dean, my boss, told me that I could not require synchronous because online was asynchronous. And so they're like, you can't require this. And as a language teacher, I'm thinking, I need synchronous. So what am I going to do? And after talking with several administrators, doing a lot of advocating for myself and our students, what we envisioned was a new form of enrollment. So courses are subdivided, as I said, into cohorts, small groups of about 10 students. Those cohorts are listed separately in the online registration system. Okay, so it'll look like if I'm teaching 3 Spanish 1 classes, it'll look like I'm teaching 6 because they'll be divided into cohorts or 8 or however many. But each of those is, limited at that sort of 10 student mark. And so when students enroll, they literally are enrolling in one of those cohorts. So what happens is they go to enroll for online Spanish 1, they look at it and it says, this has a synchronous lab Tuesdays at 7 p.m., Thursdays at 1 p.m., Wednesdays at 11:45, whatever it is. And the student is literally enrolling in the synchronous time. Because the student is enrolling in a synchronous time, we can require it. So what I would say is that took probably 3 years to develop at my school, and now other disciplines are starting to use it as well. But what I would say is it does help to try to reimagine a little bit online enrollment. It certainly helped in our case. So story number 4. Okay, we've talked about some of the logistics now of the synchronous model. Story number 4 is this. When I talk to faculty about developing a synchronous model, oftentimes they're like, wow, that sounds like overwhelming. Because if I'm meeting synchronously with students online throughout the week, oh my goodness, how do I manage that with my workload? Because teaching online, as you know, already takes a lot of time and dedication. So how am I working that in there? And that's a really real concern, and I remember feeling it. And when I took the leap to really do the synchronous online teaching, it definitely was a leap. I was like, well, if I'm going to do the synchronous sessions, there's going to be other things I can't do, or I'm going to have to stop doing, So let me show you a little bit what that looks like. So when I was teaching asynchronously at the beginning, when I first started teaching online, it was totally asynchronous with a few random synchronous elements worked in. And this is how I felt. I felt like about 75% of the time I was behind the scenes. I don't know, behind the scenes, setting things up, maybe providing some feedback, but, it sort of felt like I was always behind the scenes. And there was little direct interaction with students. It just felt like with all the stuff I was doing behind the scenes, I could only really do a few things to interact directly, and it felt sort of like a small portion of what I was doing. So if you're going to move from asynchronous to synchronous, you want to do a flip. So take a look. You want to flip it. So where it's 25 behind the scenes, 75 direct interaction. And at first, it means you'll stop doing some things that you have been doing. What kind of things are you going to stop doing? Well, in online, we work so hard to get students to interact, to be in community with one another, to have all these things. And we set up all these activities and icebreakers, and we try to get them doing all of these things so they get to know one another and they interact and all of that. You can stop doing that because you're going to have, like in my case, a weekly live class where that's what they do. So what's wonderful about the synchronous is there's suddenly all these other things that I don't have to do now behind the scenes because my students see me every week. Okay, and they see each other every week, and they have a cohort, a small group that they interact with. And and what's wonderful about it is you have that wonderful community, right? But yet there's things that, honestly, they were the things that I didn't like as much. The behind the scenes work, I was in a sense scared to give it up, but then happy to give it up in exchange for these direct interactions with students. So it is definitely possible to work it into your workload. So I want to move into now some questions and answers. We've been looking at the benefits. We looked at our our stories here, like stories of my experience developing it, stories from the student perspective, stories of, how we look at this model, how we integrate the technology, how we make it possible, and the registration piece of it and everything. So you probably can sort of identify some benefits as well as some challenges of synchronous online course delivery. And what I want to do now is really take some questions. What questions do you have? About what you've heard so far, how it might apply to your situation. So definitely turn your mics on and feel free to jump in. I'm going to check the chat first. All right, so let's move into the chat. Yeah. Oh, great. It's so fun to have someone here from my college online. That's awesome. I'm just taking a peek at the chat here. My pet just knocked my laptop over. I love this. This is online teaching, synchronous online teaching. And the happy hour. I do love happy hour. And so exactly, if you arrived late there, the slides and the resources are available. Thanks, Tina, for posting that again. So, but does anyone want to jump in with a question, a thought, a concern, anything from your perspective? Let's do a little poll. How about if does everyone know how to use the chat? Go ahead and jump over to the chat and put in here what you identified as one of the key advantages. Did you find the chat button? What do you define as some of the key advantages of a synchronous online course design? And just type something for us in the chat. Let's take a look. Looks like most of you have found the chat. So if you want to jump over there and give us a students who cannot attend a daily language class, yes. So if you have a class that maybe meets 3-4 times a week in face-to-face and it's just not going to work for them, yeah, it meets their needs. Yeah. We have, so our benefits, what other benefits do we see? And definitely, Lisa, we're going to come back to that, those challenge limitation question there. Anyone else see any other benefits that you haven't already mentioned at the beginning or just want to reinforce? I will add some. Yes. Oh my gosh, Tiffany, I was just going to write the same thing. It keeps students more engaged. I was just going to say students like it. And again, isn't it weird? Because all the summative assessments in my course are in synchronous. Because in a language class, summative assessments often take the form of speaking assessments. And they all happen there. And those are the hardest parts of the course, but yet that's what students like. More face-to-face time, yes, between the students, right? They feel less alone. They're not doing the course alone. Yeah, definitely, Lisa. I see this great application in a music course. And oh, that's wonderful too to know. Yeah, that the MBA is launching a synchronous MBA. I'm looking at the chat comments here. Now let's switch gears just for a moment and talk a little bit about some of those challenges that we see. And we have a question back here in the chat that was, let's see, let me find it again. How easy is this to sell to the administration? Lisa, I love this. Honestly, the best way in my mind to sell it, and this is what happened for us too, is that find out at your college who is the person that could set this up in the online registration system. So is there a way that students can, because typically schools will be more receptive if students register for synchronous. So is there a way, like talk to the people at your school who run the online registration system and say, hey, how can we make this happen? Like, do we just need to put like a note, like somehow identify the class as synchronous so students know when they register that it has the synchronous? Should we have them in separate little groups that they register for a particular synchronous time? Sort of investigate, like do a little back work, you know, a little behind the scenes work. And then once you know what would be possible for that, then take that to your administration and say, this is what I already know is possible. How about doing this? And you are more than welcome to mention, for example, what we do at our college. You're more than welcome to mention and say that I know this is happening in other colleges, such as, you know, you're welcome to mention that example. Because that does help too when people realize that it is happening elsewhere. What other questions or challenges do you identify, even if you don't want to phrase it as a question? Ooh, good question. So Michelle, weather can be a challenge as it can interrupt the internet connection power. A little bit, yeah. Well, definitely like a hurricane, yeah, I'm guessing. But a little bit here and there. Like in my many years of doing this, I haven't noticed it really as much of a problem. Once in a while, someone's internet speed will slightly slow during a storm or something, but it's never been a huge issue. I don't know. One tip, though, that can be helpful is, for example, if you're taking a larger class and dividing it into cohorts, meaning like, you know, smaller groups that meet online, you automatically have kind of a backup. Because like if I'm teaching Spanish 1 and I have 4 different sections, cohorts of Spanish 1 small groups, if a student has a technical difficulty with one of the sections, I can say, no problem, why don't you come tomorrow to this section this week? So I have a built-in backup, like a way for them to be able to attend a different session that same week, which does help a lot. What are some good strategies to negotiate turn taking for students speaking on their mics? Yeah, they aren't getting many of the social cues. So what really helps is if you're using a tool, first of all, if you're using a tool where you can put them into breakout rooms, because if you're noticing, for example, you're trying to do a discussion and like only 2 people are talking or something, put them into the small groups, because then it's like, well, you're face to face with 1 or 2 other people, and well, you're going to need to say something. And then you as a teacher can, just like you would in a classroom, you can mingle through those groups, because you can jump from one group to the next and listen in. That often does help. It raises the expectation that everyone will speak. Another thing that I like to do is something called mutual invitation. So for example, like say you're having a discussion and I say something and then I invite someone else to say something. So I say, I'm going to invite, you know, Rachel to say something now. And then Rachel says whatever she wants to say. If need be, she can say, I pass for now, and we'll come back to her. But then she has to then invite the next person. So then Rachel says, I invite John, you know, to give something. And it goes from one invitation to the next. It's just a strategy called mutual invitation. So you are both invited, and then you invite the next person. And so it's a way to kind of keep the conversation going from person to person. Yeah, it's a fun little strategy called mutual invitation. Yeah, what other challenges, questions? You can feel free to type them or just say them out loud. Anything?
What size class, this is Lisa Qualls,
Yeah.
what size class would you advise to possibly start Synchronous with, like a class of maybe 15 to 20, and then you could use those smaller breakouts?
That's a good question. So right now, I think it depends a lot on the discipline. So, you know, the particular subject area that you're teaching. So a regular Spanish, let's just take my subject area of Spanish. A regular Spanish class face-to-face has 25 students. My online classes also have 25 students.
Mm-hmm.
However, among those 25, we then divide them into these groups of about 10, at most 12. And so usually I'm teaching more than one section of Spanish 1, so they can kind of divide that over, you know, they can sort of divide them into groups of about 10 students. Does that help at all, Lisa?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. What other questions, concerns, things that come up do you have? I can tell you that one of the things people always tell me about Synchronous is, like I said, the social anxiety aspect. Oftentimes students take online courses because they don't want to be in a social situation of a face-to-face class. I think that is somewhat true. So what I would say is the Synchronous, it's part of that onboarding. You need to make sure that the first couple of Synchronous activities are not high stakes. Okay, so what I mean by that is, you know, someone who has social anxiety is going to be like, you know, they'll be emailing you. What do we do in these live labs? You know, I'm kind of concerned. So they'll want to know how that's going to happen. So you want to make sure that the first live synchronous sessions are kind of like practice, right? They're kind of like practice. So they're not high stakes. The grade is kind of, what do you want to say? It's just like you do it, you get the points. So the first week of my live labs is just orientation. Everyone does have to speak on camera. We do an icebreaker. They do have to go into breakout rooms, you know, and talk to people one-on-one and practice everything. But it's with the understanding that it's all practice, you know? So they just have to do it. They don't have to worry about doing it well. Okay. And so then the first time I have them meeting, you know, doing like a partner chat without me. So they're doing a synchronous meeting without me. I make sure that it's, again, it's like a credit, no credit activity. There's no accuracy stress, you know, like making sure that it's really good. You just have to do it. So if you ease them in with this, you know, it becomes easier. And of course, again, those small cohorts, because, you know, if it's really only 8, 9 other people that you have to get to know, that's less intimidating, right? So they'll never be like in front of, you know, 30 people talking and wondering what everyone is saying about them. Any other questions, challenges, things that came up? I'm going to make sure we got to everything in the chat. Great. Well, yeah, so thank you so much too to everyone else. Thanks for all the chat messages and the thank you. I'm going to just quickly show you, the last thing I want to show you here is, let's get out of this here. I want to show you the bit.ly folder where you'll find your resources, okay? Because I just want to make sure it's clear what you're going to find in there. So you go to bit.ly and then go live today. All right, and it's going to open for you a folder. So the first thing you'll see here is the PowerPoint slides from today, so you can refer back to that just to refresh your memory. You will also see an article here about synchronicity, just kind of an interesting one that I was able to download. And then within the resources here, you're going to find 2 other articles that I find to be interesting that you may, as a follow-up, may enjoy, and then also the information about TPAC and SAMR, which again is all about technology integration and making sure that when you move to Synchronous, that your Synchronous has a clear integration, right? It has a clear pedagogical purpose, and it isn't going to be seen as optional by students. All righty, I think.
I had another question.
Yeah.
This is Lisa. Which of these 3 did you like the best? The Zoom, the WebEx, or was it Collaborate
Ultra?
Uh-huh.
You know,
I've used Zoom before, but we only used it for to record like an introduction for our class.
Yeah, you know, like I have used, in my classes, I've used WebEx and I've used Collaborate Ultra. And I've used Zoom, but not in class, you know, like with other things like this or with other colleague related activities.
Mm-hmm. And all of those are pretty
honestly
comparable with whatever you're using, like we use Moodle at Drury.
Yeah. So because, like, you know, the reason that I use let's start with that. The reason I use Collaborate Ultra is because we have Blackboard at my college. And so Collaborate Ultra is just already like embedded in Blackboard.
Yeah. Yes.
And because I don't see like a huge difference between the platforms for what I'm trying to do. But I would say, you know, because it's easy, like I can do everything I need to do in Collaborate Ultra. It has all the tools I need, so there wouldn't be a reason to, you know, find another tool and link it. Now these tools like Zoom and of course, you know, WebEx or whatever you're using can of course just be like embedded with links into your Blackboard or whatever Moodle you're using. So I don't think that's necessarily a reason either. I think it literally, in my mind, having worked with a lot of, I collaborate with a lot of language teachers around the country who do synchronous teaching or are moving to synchronous teaching, or it's kind of fun to have that network. And what I would say is, to me, the biggest factor is find one that you feel the most comfortable with.
Okay.
Because to me, the tools themselves are very comparable, but the students will know fear. So if find a tool, find the one that you feel the most comfortable with so that your students will feel that same level of comfort.
Okay.
Because it's really, to me, about what you get comfortable with. Like I'm so comfortable with Collaborate now that I, you know, even if something goes wrong, it doesn't faze me. And so what I would say is it's so important for you to feel comfortable with the platform. So you might want to experiment a little bit or see at your college if they support technology-wise one of the platforms. That's another consideration, because at my school they support Blackboard, Collaborate Ultra, which just means that students can call tech support at the college if they have a question about Collaborate Ultra. So if there's a particular platform that your school potentially supports technology support-wise, would be helpful too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right, great. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here today. We're just about out of time, I know, and you might be heading to another session here on the hour. So I want to thank everyone for being here today. Synchronous Live. It was fun to go live with all of you, and I do hope that you'll consider, you know, the Synchronous online course design. If you have any additional follow-up questions for me later, or you'd like to be in touch, definitely feel free to use my email here on the screen, kgroberkus@madisoncollege.edu. Definitely check out the bit.ly, and I hope that you have great experiences going live.
Thank you very much. It was a really good session.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. That was really great.
Thanks.
I appreciate it. And let's see. Buenos dias.
That's right.
It was awesome. Thank you.
Okay, well, in about 5 minutes, we'll kick off our next session. Hope to see you guys there. Thank you.
I'll see you
Sounds
there.
great.
Bye.
Thanks so much.